Welcome to Washington Policy on the Go, Washington Policy's center podcast of news, interviews, and policy analysis.
Welcome to Washington Policy Center's Young Professionals podcast. My name's Chelsea Shapiro. I'm a board member for the WPC Young Professionals. Professionally, I'm a real estate broker for Sound Realty Group, a commercial and residential real estate team, and I also work for my family's architecture firm. And today I am talking with Mike Appleby. He is the Vice President of Chicago Title and also involved with the Master Builders Association. He's a former executive board member and also on the Affordable Housing Council board. He's also active with Snohomish County Tomorrow Board. So today, Mike and I are going to be talking about the trajectory of development in the Puget Sound and Washington region, and we're just going to go through just some of the population trends and the data and the legislation that's impacting all this, and ultimately what it means to live in the state of Washington and to be a young professional in the state of Washington. So thanks for joining me today, Mike.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get started, and we'll talk about affordability, which has kind of been a buzzword lately. And in regards to affordability, what are some of the biggest factors impacting the affordability of home purchases in the region?
Well, that's a great question. It's kind of almost a three-phase one, though, because you take a look at, we'll call it attainable. I always look at affordable as a word that it all depends on who it is that's buying. You know, $1 million may be affordable for somebody, and $400,000 may be affordable for somebody. So when we talk about attainable, I think sometimes we have to take a look what our trends have been. Number one, if the supply of land is going to be restricted as we set up growth management lines, so we're going to be restricting the advancement of the ability to develop areas that would be outside our urban growth areas, what would be 5-acre tracts, 10-acre tracts. Obviously, that'll fall outside of what we would call expansion or high growth. The job market, so that always explains why, the more jobs we have, the better real estate goes, and population numbers, and they all kind of fall in together. So if we shrink the supply of land and we go ahead and have a great job market and we go ahead and have a lot of population coming in, you really can't control kind of where the numbers are going to go. But if I look at some of the things that probably give you a little bit of history, I think when I looked back in 1993, a King County home price was $150,000 approximately, maybe even less. And today, it looks like King County is somewhere between $680,000 and $690,000.
Wow.
So in the 26 years, if you just bought two houses and sat on them, that's your 401, that's your $1.4 million worth of either rentable income or saleable real estate to take on. So it's been a great thing to be involved in real estate, and the history is, other than a year or two, it's been a consistent one since those years. But if I were to take a look at population numbers, which kind of hit on that as well, let's say that we've got about 4 million people in the central Puget Sound area as of about a year ago. And if the projection by the 2050 recommendations will be up to 5.8 million people.
Wow.
So let's take Seattle, for example. Seattle has about 750,000 people. And it took a long time to get 750,000 people squeezed inside of that jar. So we'd have to build, in the next 30 years, we'd have to build 2 more Seattles in the Puget Sound area to be able to house what the projected population number would be. And at the same time, they feel that at the 2.2 million jobs we have right now will rise to 3.4 million jobs. So that gives you an idea of our projected, what I would call prosperity. And some of the other things that fall into this whole thing just really wrap around all those same ideas. And the same thing goes for millennials. This 10-year group of millennials right now, the median age for a first-time home buyer is 32. And that median age, that millennial group, is literally 1 year away from actually hitting the sweet spot, which is the largest group of home buyers in the history of the United States.
Okay.
And they'll all come in here, and think about that for a minute. We're a tech market. So it's a lot of millennials that would come here. And right now, we are rated, I think, the 18th worst market in the country for the ability for millennials to purchase.
Wow.
So anyway, that kind of gets you to where I think, how do you go wrong when they shrink supply and people keep stacking up and jobs keep stacking up?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a lot different being a millennial today than and buying a house today versus maybe what my parents' generation experienced years ago. And we can get more into that a little bit later and kind of link it back to the American dream, but it's good to just take in the numbers and the data that go along with that and just kind of make up the whole issue in this region. So with affordability, is there a percentage of home prices that could be attributed to regulatory compliance and things that the government passed down to us?
Great question. So if you take a look at the National Association of Home Builders, NAHB, and you take a look at their statistics, they say that 25% of the cost of every new home now is regulatory, some level of tax, or some level of government. So 25% of every dollar goes towards fees and something that isn't physically involved in going into the house. That's kind of an astronomical number.
That is, and I'm assuming it's the consumer that ends up paying for that number because the builder isn't going to take it out of his pocket.
If I'm at a national level and I'm a national home builder and I'm in charge of my region and I don't hit my percentages, I don't stay very long. I have to hit the number, especially a market like ours where a lot of these home builders are looking at the Seattle area as one of their bright stars in their production of housing and their profitability. So you've got to have the pressure to create those numbers. If I were to go get a building permit right now in the city of Mount Vernon, by the time I get in paying for my sewer, water, my building permit, and all of my mitigation fees in the city of Mount Vernon, I'm going to pay about $30,000 to pick up a permit.
Wow.
And if I'm in the city,
and that's Mount Vernon. That's not even Seattle.
That's about, and that sales price might be closer to $350 to $400. So if I'm in the city of Sultan, it's between $30,000 and $35,000 to pick up a building permit in the city of Sultan, Washington,
Wow.
Snohomish County. So it gives you an opportunity to say some of the smaller communities are starving for funds, and they're going to do it off of home building to create opportunities for school mitigation, park mitigation, road mitigations. And now you know why cost has jumped up. That's just to pull a building permit.
Yeah.
That doesn't count all the other thing, the taxes and the other thing in the closing costs and all the things that are involved in actually the subcontractors and the products that are created within that are taxed as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of other factors going into that, and even just I've heard a lot about the labor shortage for the construction industry and how we don't have enough manual labor to even build. So
That's a good point.
yeah, we're dealing a lot with supply and demand, and then there's definitely an intersection there where regulations and all that comes down pretty hard on it as well.
You know, we're trying with different programs. I know some of the school districts, like we put together a pilot program. Some of the other school districts have them as well. We're trying to home grow some of our own subcontractors now, like Edmond School District and some of the other school districts have figured out, used to be through Rotary here locally, they have a carpentry program and they have a architecture program, and we've funded it through, we put up a little bit of seed money to get it started at the Snohomish County level through Nate Nearing helped us put together a county council member in the North End so that we would teach kids how to build homes in high school and start a pilot program through up at Weston High School, which is up by Arlington, and try to teach kids in the North End where literally 25% of our jobs in the North End are construction or materials related. So we have to build our own. We got to figure out how people can, and that keeps a lot of kids more interested. They don't fall out of the school system because maybe they weren't book learning type folk, but maybe they wanted to be involved in the trades, and maybe their parents were, but I mean, we're trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to pick a few people off here and there.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I know this area has definitely created a tech-based labor force, and we're attracting that from the rest of the country. But we need to build homes for those tech workers as well. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you've got some efforts going, and
Make some calluses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
raising up some builders. So can you be a little more specific about some of the demographic and population increase trends that we're seeing, and where are we headed?
So it's been great because a lot of the businesses that we have are tech related, and obviously that's a long-term business plan. It's not manufacturing or something like that things change or trends come and go, or they have cycles. A lot worse than what I would call the tech market, or the funded tech market, the privately funded. I'm going to maybe not make any money in my business for 5 years, but I'm building an app, or I'm doing something
Right.
to push forward, and then I cash everybody out and everybody makes money, and then we go make another one. So it works a little differently than like a business like ours that has to have a monthly cash flow.
Yeah.
So when you take a look at in-migration numbers, I was looking at it for like at the state. This comes from the DOL. So in 2016, we kind of hit our peak of 202,000 people moving into this state. Then 2017, 190,000, and 2018, 179,000. Now, if you were to read that, you'd say, "Oh my gosh, we've fallen off 10% in the population numbers." But that's not. You can't always prepare or compare yourself to the biggest number in history, because you'll always fail. So having those kind of numbers, somewhere between 180 to 200,000 people move into the state based on in-migration from the DOL side is a huge number. But let me give you even a better one. So in the next 15 years or so, 15 to 18 years, I'd say in Snohomish County, for example, we went over 800,000 people for the first time in the history of the county. And it's about 815,000 people. But the prediction is in 15 to 18 years that in Snohomish County we'll have to add 200,000 more people. So that's 25% population growth in just that period of time. And so you can factor it out a little better. The city of Everett has about 110,000 people. Marysville has about 62, and then Edmonds has about 45, rough numbers. So that's about 217,000 people. So in about the next 18 years, even a little shy of that, we're going to have to build another Everett, another Marysville, and another Edmonds just to house the population growth just in Snohomish County.
Wow.
Now remember, if politically at the state level, if growth management doesn't change and allow us, we're going to have to stuff all those people inside the existing jar that we have for available land. And I can tell you from being involved with about 80% of the home builders in this marketplace, we really feel like maybe there's 2 years left of saleable land that would be for townhome or subdivisions. Let's not talk about apartments and things like that, because we're talking about families, and we're talking about the opportunity to buy a new home. So when you look at those kind of numbers and you see that, okay, population just keeps going. I think it was in 2016 that there's 3,300 counties around the country. And in 2016, I think Pierce County and Snohomish County were number 1 and number 2 in the percentage of growth of their population around the entire country.
Wow.
And Seattle or King County was number 25. Now, the numbers have swayed a little bit since then, but Snohomish County stayed pretty close to that number. Pierce County went down a little bit, but now you're seeing Tacoma was one of the highest increases in home prices in the entire country. I think I saw that year over year it's like 6.6%, and I think Vegas, now it's not the same size city, but Vegas was like 6.8%, and they were the highest in the country. Even Mount Vernon is running close to that.
Wow.
So people truly, if you want to talk about demographics, you have to drive to affordability. That's really what it's become. And so our counties outside of King County are growing immensely because of the job market in King and the inability to afford, because we just saw that Seattle went to $775 on a median price. And the east side's closer to 9. And I just talked about what King County was. But I think what you're also looking at is the rise in the cost of living in Seattle topped the entire country.
That's
since
crazy.
2012. And if I take a look at our West Coast markets, we saw a 38.4% increase over those 7 years. And that was more of an increase than San Francisco, than the Bay Area, which we talked about, more than Honolulu, It's kind of amazing. In over 200 cities, we were number one.
Wow.
So I think it was even 32% increase in just the ability to rent an apartment just in the Seattle area.
Yeah.
In the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're kind of all over with those statistics, but all the demographics lead to how do we control pricing? We
Right.
can't. We really can't. And how do we make it affordable? Again, I think it's attainable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the only way to kind of get back towards attainability is I've noticed that on the east side and in Seattle, there's about 8,800 condo units
Okay.
that came in, and a little bit of legislation change to actually help some of that
Yeah,
process.
that was a win last year, the condo legislation that passed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because I know, I mean, the condos are kind of the thing that millennials and younger people should feel like they have access to purchase on the housing market. And that legislation, that was definitely a win. I think it probably opened up some more opportunities for builders to build condos, and then hopefully that just trickles down and is a positive thing for the consumer. So, yeah, these are all staggering numbers. I'm a born and bred Washington native, but I did live in LA for 10 years, and I think some people in this area have a hard time wrapping their brain around just the magnitude of development and growth that we're experiencing, and some of it actually does, it kind of is feeling a little bit like LA with just the traffic and the density, and Seattle's not really a small town anymore.
Well, what are we, I think depending on who you're talking to, whether you're either number 4, number 5, or number 9 in the country for traffic congestion, the Seattle area. And here's the most staggering thing. For the size of its city, Everett, Washington is the most congested city in the entire country. So if you look at how long it takes you to wait in line and how long it takes you to travel down I-5 and get through Everett on a day-to-day basis based on its 110,000 people, I get to travel a fair amount, and I go through a lot of towns that are about 100,000 people. There's no traffic like this.
Yeah.
Not even close. So it gives you an idea that that is one great prediction I can make for you. Traffic's going to get worse.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
think it
you
gets
could bet
better.
money on that
Yeah, I think
pretty safely.
I'm pretty good.
So, yeah, that is one area that Washington Policy Center does do a lot of research around transportation, and there's definitely a lot going on right now on the political side of that locally. So it's kind of interesting to just talk about the numbers and the data behind what's driving a lot of the transportation issues. Let's talk a little bit about how some of these trends intersect with the environment, since environmental issues are something WPC deals with as well. And I mean, a lot of the building industry is very heavily regulated. Can you talk a little bit about how some of those building regulations, they intersect with environmental issues, and how that impacts us being able to build?
Well, there's, it comes from all different angles, right? I take a look at, like, California passed legislation on new construction now that you have to have solar energy panels. You have to create some level of solar energy on all new construction houses, or homes, however you want to put it. Now that's a real leap. That became a real leap because that's not an inexpensive way to go about doing things. And I think here locally, a few years back, we continue to expand critical area ordinances.
Okay.
SEPA applications, State Environmental Protection Act, all types of things that have that afford our local government to weigh in on everything you're going to touch on a piece of property that you're going to try to develop into future family housing. And so there's been so many different levels of critical areas, and every county kind of does it differently. And then the Department of Ecology at the state level, they actually have another layer that goes on top of it.
Okay.
That they even oversee it at even a higher level. So we are very, it's a federal offense. You're going to go to prison if you try to damage the environment in any way. And so it's just the risk reward in people trying to do that isn't really there anymore. So our cities, our counties, our state all have levels of environmental protection. And now, because of the new discharge rule when it comes to low impact development, where if the water falls out of the sky, you need to do everything you can to make it go into the ground where it falls. Where we're not going to be doing as much storage of rain or storage detention and then running it down into storm systems and then running it down into the bay. We're going to use as much as we can, because low impact development became a state law, or I think it's required to meet it in like 2017. So we're going to see how water is not going to run off site. Now, you can't do anything about downtown Seattle. You're going to cover every square inch with a building. So that's going to be dealt with differently. But in outlying areas, I think residential is taking such a large hit. And so now we're going to pervious asphalt and pervious concrete and all other ways to allow water to flow into the ground rather than run it off into our streams, which is really, I think environmentally, that's a big thing. I mean, just storing water and allowing it to run someplace else wasn't really the key, but allowing us to go in and put rain gardens in and do other issues or other ways to try to offset the environment. We have an enormous amount of salmon legislation and setbacks that what a lot of people don't realize is if you have a salmon spawning stream of any kind, you have 150 to 300 foot setback on either side of that stream.
Wow.
So you will lose hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of usable acres. And I'm not complaining about that. That's the rules, and you play by the rules, and the laws were passed. I'm just saying that cuts out an enormous amount of, because every county that we live in around here has nothing but streams and rivers and everything else. That's part of the reason we live here.
Yep.
And not that we live here because stuff falls out of the sky on our head all the time, but we just, we enjoy our outdoor life. And so then if you throw into the fact that Puget Sound Regional Council, their fight to do whatever they can to not move over urban growth boundaries out, to allow people to create more single-family housing, therefore more family housing, there's going to be a lot of pressure on the price of single-family housing, because we're going, go straight up, don't go out. That doesn't function for everybody in their family structure. So I've seen that now 40 to 50% of millennials say, okay, I'll drive to affordability. 70% of millennials feel that it's still probably the best investment they'll make is buying a home for themselves or their family. So there's a lot of different pressures making people, because you've got to, people are important. They should have a quality of life. And part of the quality of life they should have is the ability to actually have the American dream of buying a home.
Yeah.
But also be able to actually get to work within 3 hours.
Yep.
So I think we wandered around on that question a little bit. But that's really, environmentally, we got a lot of safeguards going on. We have a lot of organizations chasing that. They are overseen by 3 layers. So
does that hit that, you threw out that 25% number for builders, and so those environmental regulations, does that feed directly into that 25%, or adding things like rain gardens or pervious paving, and is that additional on top of?
So what ends up happening usually is you're going to put a huge detention vault in to take all the water runoff from the rooftops and the streets and the sidewalks. Anything that won't allow water through, you have to detain that. And you have to detain it for some amazing size rain. So you have to overbuild these because they don't ever want them to flood. So now what we're saying, which I think is a really good idea, is now we're saying, no, we don't want all those. We don't want that stagnant water sitting there. So we are going to put it back on the builder. We're going to tell the builder he has to put a rain garden on every lot he builds, right? We're going to make sure each lot is on its own. And so the cost may not go to the developer, it may go to the builder. But in a lot of cases, I'd say, 10 of the top 12 builders here in the Puget Sound area, I think I'm close to that number, are now national home builders. So they're developers and home builders.
Right.
There aren't very many developers anymore that develop lots or land, and then somebody comes in and buys a finished lot. So it's a part of their package. But to answer your question about 25%, processing fees and fees that you would pay would go towards that 25%.
Okay.
Not so much the actual structure. But again, we're going greenbelt now.
Yeah.
There, different legislation in areas and are trying to force greenbelt on every home. And, honestly, the consumer.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's become the overriding purchase reason. Most of it's still location and price. But some people do look to see if it's a greenbelt home.
Yeah, I know it definitely matters to some people if they're shopping for a green
Your
belt home.
demographic group.
Yeah.
Your demographic group.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're 59 like me, probably not looking at the immediate, okay, was it greenbelt?
No.
There's probably some other issues you're looking for.
No.
But I would say if you got 40 and under, probably an issue.
It's important, although I feel affordability is probably more important to them, and you kind of have to pick your battles, and you can't have affordable homes and greenbelt and save the salmon and do everything.
I think your affordable number, it's really, every time I look at different numbers, it all comes down to the same thing. I think we were one of the largest increases. Seattle itself had over 21,000 renters now that make over $150,000 a year, just either haven't found the spot they want to be, they don't want the problem of a homeowner at this point, they're happy where they're at, so they can afford to buy a home. I just don't think they are comfortable buying it where they want
Right.
at this point. So the number just keeps sliding away. Even the idea that we thought home prices were dipping. And when I take a look now that, it's made a comeback here over this last year after it took a fall in the last half of last year. And it went up, 3.3% again, year over year this year, just in Seattle, which is the number everybody was saying, okay, we're going the wrong way, and buy canned food and bottled water, it's coming. But I don't see it.
No, I don't either. And after the population numbers you just read off, I mean, we're getting more people into the region, and we aren't building enough houses. So if you just look at it from a supply and demand, just really basic principle, buying real estate, it's a good investment, and yeah.
So here, you just brought up something that I think is important. We're building about 185 homes a month in Snohomish County, whether that be townhomes or single-family residence, right, for the purchase. In other words, we're selling about that many, and there's about 800,000 people here. We're selling about 320 townhomes and single-family residences in King County, and there's 2.2 million people. So tell me that we're not undersupplying a huge market that is financially, the money and the income down there is crazy. I think, what is the median income for a Google employee? 180,000 now? Okay, there's a whole lot of people that are, at 80.
Yep.
And there's a whole lot of people at $1 million, but still, for full-time employment at a great employer, that's pretty good money on a day-to-day basis. And so we are not supplying. And if you continue to keep growth management lines where they are, and you don't continue to supply raw materials, which is the land, then of course, how does land stay at a low number? It has to go up. And now we're talking about, if you want to get back on the political side, you're talking about House Bill 1923 that encourages the cities to accept at least 6 units per acre and adopt lot size averaging and clustering, things like that. We're going to have to do more of that because, there still is a large part of the market that wants a single-family house. It might be a different type of single-family house, but they still want it. And and so somehow or another, our buildable lands inventory in 2023, when we're going to do it again, and all the cities or the counties and cities have to meet that and find out whether they can. So every 7 years we do that study. I would really, really doubt that everybody's not going to come back and say, we don't have enough.
Yeah.
So, but you got to remember, not everybody wants to live in an apartment. So just rezoning areas into high-density multifamily to say, okay, hey, no, we got enough to handle all the population now. That's not the way it's set up, because a certain amount of the population wants to live in a home and wants to buy a home.
Yep.
And you can't just say that, okay, we're just going to go straight up in the air and put 8-story to 40-story apartments or condos. Well, you can in downtown Seattle. You can in some of those marketplaces, but the other outlying counties, that's not how they made their bread and butter.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then you've got ADUs and things like that we're going to keep our fingers crossed, because as you mentioned earlier, that's been a really popular program down in Seattle too.
Yeah.
And also extended family can live at home, stay at home, create more units of housing on existing single family houses or lots.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much land, and like you're saying, we do need to use a little bit more of what we do have available to us, but we need to get creative on the land that we already have. And some of the ADU programs are a great solution to that. So Seattle did just pass something back in August that loosened up a lot of the standards, and in theory, on certain properties, you can basically have 3 units if it's owner occupied, and it's a creative solution on a lot of levels. It hits those multi-generation families. So if you have aging parents that want to live close by, or other siblings or single young professionals, and then even if you're just a millennial family buying a home and you want to rent out the other unit or do it as an Airbnb, it's a great investment strategy as well. So that seems like a total win. And there was a bill that tried to go through last year at the state level and didn't quite make it, but it sounds like we might be getting another version of it this year.
Well, it's a short session.
Okay.
So I don't know that we'll get 1923 passed this year. I think it might be kind of an uphill battle. But it feels like we might be able to get the ADU duplex bill pushed through at not just the city of Seattle, but more at a state level, because it seems to be one of those things that people go, okay, that doesn't look like it's going to hurt me very much, and that's not scary for me. And based on the different demographic groups and gender groups that you're working with, it fits kind of an infill need.
Yeah.
It's not going to create home ownership, but it'll create opportunities
Right.
to build 2 additional structures in your yard, maybe an attached, maybe 2 separate, maybe
Yeah.
one is separate, maybe one attached, depending on. But again, that allows for rental, and it allows for extended family to stick around. But
Yeah, and maybe more affordable rentals too, because the rental market also has gone up as well.
It's starting to go up again. It flattened out for a while, but now I saw from some of my statistics that the rental market was actually increasing in price again. And part of that has to do with the fact that now we're getting a large number of buildings stacking in. I think there's about 40,000 more units in the Seattle area, or what I would call the Seattle marketplace, that are approved and not built, that we're still going to see. But we've built more units in the last 5 years in our central Puget Sound area than we built in the former 50 years. And we're stacking those on top of each other, and we're still
And we're
not
absorbing
really there.
them as well.
I was surprised that we absorbed them, especially at the number they're coming in at. But I mean, we got a 2-bedroom apartment, 2 people are living in it, right?
Yep.
They roommate it, they do whatever. Closer to work, no parking, right? Maybe a bike rack.
Yeah.
Something like that. A different style of living. But
Yeah.
not all cities are that works for. Bellevue's kind of a classic situation where if you go to Bellevue and you stand in downtown and you go, oh my gosh, there must be 1 million people living here, because that's a lot of high rise, right? And then you just go 1 block away and you've got single family housing on the west side, on the back side of the Bellevue Mall there.
Yeah, Bellevue's unique, that's for sure.
But it's really not a bad idea. You
No,
can
it's
have
not.
downtown living right there, or you can live 3 blocks away and have single family. The city of Everett just did that.
Yeah.
They raised their height limit to 12 to 25 stories in a town that the 2 tallest buildings were like 11 stories. So it gives you a feel for everybody's going, okay, we can't grow out, we got to grow up. And the only place we're going to be able to grow out is if the county agrees to expand an urban growth boundary, which,
Yeah.
like I said, those buildable lands inventories, when they're done every 7 years, they project out for 7 years. So I really feel like that's the only way that we're going to create what I would call more attainable housing. Some of our marketplaces that we thought were like, wow, what's going on there? Like Lake Stevens has been a great growth market. I mean, it was the bedroom community for Boeing for I forgot how many years now in a row. I bet you if I went out there, I'd maybe find 200 or 300 lots left is all that I have land for. City of Sultan, I had talked to last week, and their planning director, and they've got 700 lots in their system. 700
Wow.
lots for future development, and they're going to get gobbled up unless the market takes a flat spot.
Yeah.
But nothing here in our market says that we have a flat spot coming. If something else affects us, it's not jobs, it's not people moving in, it's if something else came from outside of our area. I mean, interest rates are beyond ridiculously low.
Yeah.
If you're shopping, I kind of try to tell people this on a regular basis. If you're shopping for a house, do everything you can to get in now. because that interest rate can stick for 30 years. Don't expect you're going to get that lucky for that period of time. I can remember when my wife and I bought our first house, we were ecstatic that fixed rates got under 13%. It was 12 and 7/8, and so we pulled the trigger. And so anyway, somebody can grab onto a 30-year fixed rate in the threes right now.
Yeah.
You have no idea what security you're giving your family for the next 30 years if you just grab and hold.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, politics does play a part.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, a lot of this, we're talking a lot about home ownership, and a lot of it circles back to the American dream, which that has always been just linked to the ability to own a home. And so do you think that the American dream of home ownership, is it still intact and attainable for most people?
Yeah, I like the word that you're using, attainable. Drive to affordability or attainability is a little bit of it. We are going to have different types of housing created now. We might go to a lot more smaller one-bedroom condos. We've squished in townhouse living. If I were to look in, let's say, from Everett to the South Snohomish County line, which is a great area to poke at because that is feeding King County.
Yeah.
There's 160,000 commuter trips a day going back and forth to King and Snohomish County. That's a lot of people working back and forth. But just in Snohomish County, we sponsored a bill for, which was in Seattle, same thing. And it's called the Fee Simple Townhome Ordinance. They call it a unit lot subdivision in Seattle. And we came up with that ordinance because we saw, we're in trouble in '07. We got to figure out how to get more affordable, attainable housing at a lower price. So we wrote an ordinance, we pushed it through, we didn't have any townhomes. Now when I look at the number of applications for multifamily, the number of applications for future subdivisions from Everett to the Snohomish King line.
Yeah.
There's about 3,500 units in the system, and 1,600 of them are townhomes.
Wow.
And that number's multiplying. So
That's
in the next
huge shift over just less than 2 decades.
It takes 2.5 years to get it through the system to actually get to the point where you're framing and building it. So if I go 3 years out, over 50% of all the home building in Snohomish County from Everett south will be over townhomes, won't be single family. We're running out of single.
Yeah.
Unless you go to one of the outlying burgs, you're going to be moving into a townhome in about 5 years.
Yeah. Well, as long as they put parking in them, I'm okay with it. I'm not a fan of some of the trends in Seattle where there's no parking in some of these, and it really does feel like there is a war on cars, and it just makes the transportation issue a lot more difficult.
I think they've convinced the people in Seattle. I think they've convinced people that 70% don't use cars. So therefore, they're going to bike. They're going to do something like that.
So we have a couple signature questions that we always try and fit in with these podcasts, and one is, what does all this whole conversation, what does this mean for a young professional in the state of Washington?
So if you take a look at some of the things we're looking at for sound transit and some of those other things, I don't want to get into I-90/76 and everything because I really don't know the numbers well enough to understand who's saying what or what it really comes down to. But obviously, in our next go-around, transit's going to be a huge thing. Now, it's going to be 2036, I think, until we finally get our whole transit connected if things go the way they were supposed to work. So your commutability, and it seems like the sad thing is most of the time when I sit on any of the boards I sit on, we talk about traffic 75% of the time. We don't talk about the house. We don't talk about families. We just talk about housing. And so I think that's which is a shame. But for a young professional, obviously, the type of housing that they are going to attain is going to change. The size of the square footage, the amount of commutability. So if you want a bigger home and you want something less than 7 figures, you're going to have to drive. So you're going to have to figure we're going to work differently. I think for traffic's sake, it'd be great to see the fact that, that businesses stagger their start and stop times for, we start at 7 this week, 8 this week, 9 this week, and we change our start and stop times so we have our commuter traffic kind of stretched out a little bit further, and it kind of takes a little bit off. One of the things that I can share with you is I think when they built those freeways in 1965, they've added 1 lane since then.
Yeah.
Literally. So they aren't making them bigger. We're just stacking more bodies on top of that thing. And so for the young professional, keep being professional.
Okay.
Keep making more money. Because if you've got anything out of this talk, our supply line is going to get really difficult here as time goes on. You may end up in a condo. You may end up in a townhome unless you have the ability to drive to quite a ways to an outskirt, or you're willing to drive to Pierce County, or you're willing to drive to Arlington or some of those areas. But again, those guys are going to run out of ground in the next couple of years as well. And then we have to figure out about how we're going to recreate land.
Yeah.
And a lot of the large builders are building about 70% of the homes around here. Once they run out of land, they don't do infill very well.
Mm-hmm.
They don't shrink to fit. So then we have to figure out how we're going to resupply our home manufacturers. And in 2007, we lost a whole generation. So we literally, to go look for people that are 30 to 40 years old to become home builders again, there are very few out there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, the shame that I see is trying to find more people that are willing to manufacture homes in an area, in that marketplace, after this group that's my area kind of retires in the next 2 to 5 years. Who's going to do it again? So, like I said, the young professional, keep making more money.
Okay.
That's the way you're going to stay in town.
So the American dream is attainable, but you might need to make more money, and you might need to compromise on driving or the size of your single family house.
I think I saw the median income went almost up $5,000 to $7,000 in 1 year this last year.
Okay.
And so that tells you that wages are starting to move up a little bit. And but the median income doesn't buy what you need to buy.
Yeah.
It allows you to rent.
Yeah.
And that's in all marketplaces. Unless you have two median income producers. If you have two median income producers, you can make it work.
Okay. Well, lots of great things to think about, and thank you so much for your time today. And
Thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for listening to Washington Policy on the Go. If you liked it, tell a friend and share this episode on your social media. Send any questions or comments to us at washingtonpolicy@washingtonpolicy.org.